All right, today we're jumping into a really thought-provoking text, Defense of Hindu Society by Sitaram Goel. Now, just to be clear, our job here isn't to agree or disagree with the book, but to lay out the author's arguments as clearly as we can. So, let's get into it.
So, the book's main idea is that Hindu society is up against a serious threat from what Goel calls hostile ideologies. To really get what he's saying, we're going to walk through his argument in three parts. First, how he sees the problem. Second, the big philosophical ideas he uses. And finally, the solution he puts on the table.
You know, this quote really gets to the heart of the book's tone. You can feel the urgency here. This isn't some dry academic text. Goel is writing with his deep personal concern. He feels like this ancient, massive society is being unfairly attacked and misunderstood, and he's stepping into the ring to defend it.
So, where does Goel start? Well, his whole analysis kicks off with this core idea, that Hindu society isn't playing on a level field. He paints a picture of a society that's always on the defensive, constantly reacting to attacks from what he sees as aggressive, foreign belief systems.
But here's where it gets interesting. He doesn't just point fingers outward. He argues that a huge part of the problem is actually internal. He calls it a kind of societal amnesia, a self-forgetfulness, where the society has lost faith in its own heritage and has actually started to believe the negative things its critics are saying.
And he gets really specific about the language he thinks is being used as a weapon. He calls these terms cheap jibes and argues they're constantly thrown around to make Hindu society feel apologetic and defensive, forcing it to argue on its critics' terms.
Okay, so to really build his case, Goel introduces this big idea, this contrast between what he calls free creeds and closed creeds. And to explain what he means, he tells this great little story about a Soviet diplomat. So, picture this. A Soviet diplomat lands in a busy, free market city. He's used to a world where everything is planned from the top down. He steps out, completely overwhelmed, walks up to someone and asks a question that, to him, is perfectly logical. Any guesses what he might ask?
He asks, "Where can I find your housing committee?" I mean, you can just imagine the confused look on the other person's face, right? The diplomat just can't wrap his head around a system where something as basic as finding a place to live isn't controlled by some central government body.
And he just goes downhill from there. He asks about the food committee, the transport committee, and each time he's told they don't exist, that they're just grocery stores and taxis, he gets more and more agitated. The freedom just doesn't make sense to him.
And so for him, the conclusion is obvious. There is no system in this country. It is a chaos all around. Because his entire frame of reference is built on top-down control, a society that works from the ground up just looks like a total mess.
And that story is the key to understanding Goel's whole argument. He says that's exactly how a closed creed, with its one prophet, one book, one path, sees a free creed like Sanatana Dharma. The spiritual freedom and diversity, with all its different scriptures and paths of self-discovery, looks like spiritual chaos, just like the free market looked like social chaos to the diplomat.
So what exactly does he mean by Sanatana Dharma? For Goel, it's not really a religion in the way we might think of one. He sees it as this universal, timeless idea that the search for truth, for goodness, for beauty is just built into every single human soul.
Okay, so this brings us to another big point Goel tackles, and it's one of those cheap jibes we mentioned earlier, this whole idea of many gods versus one god.
According to Goel, calling the Hindu view world polytheism completely misses the point. He argues it's not about believing in a list of different competing gods, but about a deep intuitive feeling that the divine is in everything. It's a way of seeing the whole world as sacred.
And you see this pop up everywhere, right? The sky, the sun, the earth, they're all seen as divine. Rivers are treated as goddesses. Animals are sacred. Heck, in this worldview, even your own mother and father are seen as divine. The sacred isn't somewhere out there. It's right here, all around us.
And he draws a really sharp contrast with his definition of monotheism. Now, in his analysis, this isn't a spiritual feeling, but a very specific theological idea. A God who is extra-cosmic, totally outside of the universe he created, separate from it, and who only speaks through a few chosen people.
And this quote he uses from the writer Ram Swarup really just nails the point he's trying to make. The real issue isn't a numbers game, one god versus many gods. For him, the real difference is between a sincere way of worship that sees the divine everywhere and a way of worship that he believes is based on exclusion.
All right, so we've seen Goel's diagnosis of the problem and the philosophical ideas he's working with. Now the book takes a turn. He starts laying out a plan of action, what he calls the first principle of defense. And it's a pretty straightforward three-step plan. Step 1, stop judging your own heritage using someone else's rulebook. Step 2, flip the script. Start looking at other worldviews through your own spiritual lens. And step 3, you have to do the homework. Reconnect with your own spirituality, your own history. It's really a call to reclaim a kind of intellectual independence.
But then he takes it even further. The final part of the book zooms out from just Hindu society to a global scale, and this is probably the most radical part of his whole argument.
He quotes Ramswarup again to make this huge point. He's not just talking about India anymore. He's suggesting that everyone, people in Europe, in Africa, in the Americas, needs to look back to their own ancient pre-monotheistic traditions to find their spiritual soul.
So for Goel, this is what real universalism looks like. It's not about the whole world converting to one single belief. No, it's the opposite. It's about every culture rediscovering its own unique spiritual DNA, its own deepest roots.
And that's where he leaves us, with this really provocative thought. His solution is basically a call for a global revival of the world's ancient pagan gods. The Greek gods, the Norse gods, the Egyptian gods, you name it. It's a wild idea, and it really makes you stop and think, what would that actually look like today in our modern world?